Welcome back, listeners, to Diplomacy and Discourse Podcast. I'm your host, AR, and I'm delighted to have you here for part 2 of our discussion on global dynamics and the evolving geopolitical landscape. If you missed part 1, we explored Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations and the tug-of-war between culture and power. Today, we pivot to the present and the near future. Regional unions, China's Belt and Road Initiative, Central Asia's strategic crossroads, Africa's growing leverage, and China's expanding footprint in Latin America. Before we get started, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow the show. Your support helps us reach more curious minds. Send your thoughts and questions to diplomacyandiscourse@gmail.com. Now, let's unravel the complex layers of part 2. A quick reminder, once again, I'm not going to state whether I agree or disagree with Huntington's thesis, but understanding its implications can help us frame how narratives about culture intersect with power politics and economics. The idea of Eurasia has gained traction as China and Russia deepen coordination across the world's largest landmass, with Central Asia at the heart of this vision. Geography makes the region a bridge between Europe and Asia and the Middle East, astride historic and modern trade corridors. Its resources are formidable: oil, gas, uranium, and critical minerals concentrated in states like Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Security concerns also run through the region, given proximity to Afghanistan and China's Xinjiang, which makes stability a priority for Beijing, Moscow, and Western capitals alike. For Russia, Central Asia remains a traditional sphere of influence. For China, it is the linchpin of westward connectivity. China's Belt and Road Initiative, launched in 2013, is the connective tissue of this strategy. In Central Asia, its imprint spans pipelines, railways, roads, and power lines, from the China-Kazakhstan oil pipeline to the advancing China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan railway. Beyond steel and concrete, Beijing has expanded trade, invested in mining, agriculture, and manufacturing, and layered on cultural diplomacy through scholarships, exchanges, and educational initiatives. After the disruptions caused by the pandemic, as well as some debt distress and project delays across parts of Africa and Asia, Beijing has been recalibrating toward a BRI 2.0, which involves fewer megaprojects and more targeted, lower-risk investments in greener infrastructure, digital corridors, and supply chain security. Rather than a single EU-style Eurasian Union, what is emerging is a looser web of overlapping frameworks. Russia's Eurasian Economic Union, the EAEU, China's BRI, Belt and Road Initiative corridors, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a deeper trade and energy interdependence. For the United States and the European Union, that web functions as a counterweight to Western standards and finance, especially as BRICS expands and conversations about de-dollarization gain visibility. For the Middle Eastern states, it offers options: Chinese capital and technology, Russian energy and security links, without abandoning ties to Washington and Europe. While some rhetoric tilt towards civilizational identity, the drivers here are largely geopolitical and economic, like logistics, energy, security, and markets. Africa is central to the next phase of global competition. The continent's role in energy transition is unmatched, with cobalt, lithium, manganese, and rare earths are crucial for electric vehicles and renewable grids. A fast-growing workforce and rapid urbanization are reshaping markets and governance, while new corridors like ports, rail, and fiber, including Chinese-built digital infrastructure, are rerouting trade and data flows. This has prompted competing offers. Western initiatives like the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, China's recalibrated BRI, and growing Gulf foreign wealth. In practice, African governments are hedging, blending partnerships to maximize leverage. Meanwhile, China's presence in Latin America has deepened. Beijing is now a top trading partner for Brazil, Chile, and Peru, with expanding ties to Argentina and Uruguay. In Paraguay, recognition of Taiwan intersects directly with access to Chinese markets for soy and beef. Investments in ports, power, transmission, rail upgrades, and renewables have been accompanied by technology exports, from telecom gear to cloud services, which fuel U.S. concerns about security and dependence. Financial tools like currency swap lines and increased RMB settlement provide an alternative to dollar exposure for some partners. Results are mixed. Certain projects face delays, renegotiation, or political pushback. Yet the overall direction is clear. Latin American governments are increasingly hedging, embracing Chinese capital while sustaining US and EU ties. So to keep us honest here, it helps to step outside Huntington's frame. Realists like John Mearsheimer would argue that what we are seeing isn't a civilizational confrontation at all, but a classic struggle for influence shaped by geography and power. The BRI, the EAEU, the SCO, these are instruments of state strategy. Joseph Nye, by contrast, reminds us that influence also flows through interdependence and soft power. Universities, cultural exports, standards, and technology. Even rivals remain connected, and development critics point to debt risks, transparency gaps, and environmental impacts that are forcing Beijing and host countries to tighten governance and rethink project pipelines. From here, we can move in a few critical directions. We could follow the Eurasian story to the maritime choke points that now shape global commerce, like the Red Sea, the Suez, and the Indian Ocean. In a moment of attacks and rerouted shipping, we could trace BRI's logic into the technology arena, where the chip war, rare earths, and AI standards define the next layer of power. Or we could jump to financial architecture, where BRICS expansion and alternative payment systems test the edges of dollar dominance. Wherever we go, the through line is the same. The balance between culture and power is being renegotiated through infrastructure, technology, and economics, not just rhetoric. China's influence in South America has grown rapidly on the back of economic engagement. Beijing is now a major trading partner for several South American economies, like importing soybeans, oil, copper, and lithium, while exporting manufactured goods. Chinese state banks and companies have financed and built infrastructure, invested in energy and agriculture, and extended credit in ways that have stimulated growth and diversified funding options for governments long reliant on Western lenders. Diplomatically, China has layered high-level visits, bilateral agreements, and cooperation mechanisms on top of this commerce. Platforms like CELAC, CELAC, and the China CELAC Forum give Beijing a regional stage for dialogue and deal-making that complements country-by-country outreach. That said, the China playbook faces pushback and limits. Economists warn that heavy exposure to Chinese commodity demand can create dependency and vulnerability to price swings. Environmental and social concerns around mining, dams, and transport corridors have triggered protests and regulatory scrutiny. Politically, Washington views part of this expansion through a strategic lens, especially when it touches 5G networks, ports, critical minerals, or defense-adjacent infrastructure, reviving a quiet competition reminiscent of earlier eras. South America's long-standing ties to the United States and the EU, along with domestic debates over transparency and debt sustainability, complicate Beijing's path. The results is not a clean swing into China's orbit, but a hedging posture. Many governments seek Chinese capital and markets while maintaining Western relationships. Zooming out, the question of whether China is overtaking the United States depends on which dimensions of power you watch. Economically, China is the world's second largest economy and has expanded trade and investment across Asia, Africa, and the Americas, with the Belt and Road Initiative connecting infrastructure and supply chains at scale. Yet the US still anchors the global financial system, sets key standards through its multinationals and markets, and retains deep trade relationships across continents. Militarily, the United States remains unmatched in global reach, alliances, and force projection. China's modernization and expanding presence, especially in the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean, are significant, but its ability to operate globally at US scale is still developing. In soft power, American advantages endure, like universities, entertainment, open research ecosystems, and the dominance of English continues to attract talent and shape culture. China invests in cultural diplomacy, like Confucius Institutes, media, and scholarships, but whether that closes the gap is uncertain. The bottom line is that influence is multifaceted. Economic, military, technological, financial, and cultural, and the US and China are competing, overlapping, and interdependent all at once. Declaring a winner misses how dynamic and domain-specific this competition is. So looking ahead, the world of 2050 may rhyme with decades since 2015, like multipolar, networked, and competitive, yet more organized around regional blocks. Eurasia may cohere through overlapping frameworks like the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and China's BRI corridors. In the Americas, MERCOSUR and the legacy of UNASUR shape trade and politics, while in Africa, the African Union deepens coordination on markets, mobility, and security. These regional architectures could evolve into what some might call civilizational systems, though that term obscures the pragmatic economics and security interests driving them. Whether this constitutes an end of history or simply a new equilibrium is very much an open question. West Africa illustrates how regional institutions can matter in practice. ECOWAS, ECOWAS, was founded in 1975, aims to promote integration, trade, and macroeconomic coordination while serving as a platform for conflict prevention and crisis response. The bloc's strategic geography, Atlantic access, resource endowments, and position along key maritime and air routes gives it weight beyond its borders. When ECOWAS works, it can stabilize politics, harmonize regulations, and attract investments by lowering cross-border frictions. When it falters, the region's security and economic prospects suffer, reminding us that the effectiveness of regional unions depends not only on treaties, but on member states' political will and administrative capacity. The recent military takeovers in Niger, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Mali have shaken West Africa's political order. ECOWAS has condemned these groups and responded with sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and mediation aimed at restoring constitutional rule. The bloc has a track record of crisis management, sometimes successfully shepherding transitions back to civilian governance. But persistent coups strain its credibility and slow regional integration. Even so, ECOWAS is unlikely to collapse. Its value as a platform for trade, migration management, and collective security remains clear and member states have strong incentives to keep it functioning. The risk is not ECOWAS's demise, but a prolonged period of uneven norms, where some capitals drift from democratic commitments and integration stalls. Africa is not a monolith. It is 54 diverse states shaped by pre-colonial complexity, colonial borders, and post-colonial experiments in governance. Those legacies still influence politics and economics today, from cross-border ethnic ties to administrative systems and legal frameworks. Yet, the continent's agency is growing. A young population, rapid urbanization, and critical resources for the energy transition give African governments leverage in global negotiations. Philosophies like Ubuntu, emphasizing shared humanity and communal responsibility, offer a homegrown ethical frame for regional cooperation. The African Union's agenda, from the Africa Continental Free Trade Area to peace and security missions, points towards deeper integration. Africa's relative geographic islandness can be a constraint on connectivity, but it also strengthens the case for regional self-determination and coordinated infrastructure, education, health, and tech investments. The more effectively African institutions deliver on roads and ports, power and broadband, schools and clinics, the more the continent will shape not just its own future, but global markets, migration, and diplomacy. South America's regional projects reflect similar goals of bargaining power and reliance. MERCOSUR, MERCOSUR, founded in 1991 by Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, promotes trade integration through tariff reductions and common rules. UNASUR, UNASUR, launched in 2008 to foster political coordination and cooperation on infrastructure, social policy, and security, has had a more uneven trajectory amid shifting domestic politics and regional alignments. Neither bloc aims to threaten global powers. Rather, they seek to amplify South American interests and reduce external vulnerability. Their effectiveness rises and falls with member commitment, bureaucratic capacity, and macroeconomic conditions. The pandemic and subsequent geopolitical strains tested these institutions, forcing adjustments in trade, health, cooperation, and supply chains. What endures is the logic. Regional coordination can lower transaction costs, stabilize expectations, and strengthen each country's hand in a volatile world. Across these regions, China's influence has grown through trade, infrastructure, finance, and diplomatic forums. China and the China CELAC Forum included, while the United States retains deep economic, military, and cultural reach. Who is ahead depends on the domain. The US still leads in global military projection, alliance networks, and soft power. China leads in trade volumes with many commodity exporters and in targeted infrastructure finance. Both face limits. Beijing contends with debt concerns and political pushback. Washington faces domestic polarization and policy swings. The likely outcome is not a single winner, but a long competition across economic, technology, standards, and narratives, interdependent even when adversarial. Do these regional developments herald civilizational blocks? Perhaps in rhetoric, but in practice, they are driven by pragmatic economics and security. Eurasian frameworks, MERCOSUR, UNASUR, ECOWAS, and the African Union can stabilize neighborhoods, pool bargaining power, and smooth trade. They can also stall when politics shift or when costs rise. A future super-civilization feels more like an analytical metaphor than a policy reality. History doesn't culminate, it compounds. Technology shocks, climate stress, demographic change, and financial cycles will keep reshaping how these regions cooperate and compete. The Clash of Civilizations framework argues that future conflicts will fall along cultural and civilizational fault lines. Yet, even when we see projects that knit together different cultures, like Eurasia's overlapping integration schemes, their drivers are more geopolitical and economic than civilizational. Scholars are divided for good reason. Civilizations are not fixed. They are living, changing collections of people shaped by politics, markets, technology, and ideas. History offers examples of both bitter conflict and deep cooperation along cultural lines. In our globalized era, interdependence, technology, and constant people-to-people contact create channels for understanding that can temper division, though they can also amplify grievances when misused. If a civilizational clash were to occur, predicting its geography would be guesswork. Flashpoints emerge where geopolitics, identity, and economic intersect. Straits and borders, resource basin and megacities, regions under stress from climate or migration. That uncertainty underscores a practical imperative. Individuals, communities, and nations can reduce risk by cultivating dialogue, building institutions that manage diversity, and cooperating on shared problems. Culture matters, but so do choices. When discussing why some individuals prefer to remain within ethnic, religious, cultural, or racial communities, nuance is essential. Politics, history, and psychology all play roles. Communities that have faced discrimination or rapid change may prioritize preserving heritage and social cohesion. People also naturally gravitate towards shared language, faith, or customs, which can provide comfort and mutual support. At the same time, many actively seek integration, valuing the creativity, opportunity, and resilience that come from diverse networks. The task for policymakers and civic leaders is not to force a single model, but to make inclusion real. Equal opportunities, protection of rights, space for cultural expression, and sustained dialogue between groups. Done well, societies can honor cultural preservation and promote integration at once. As we navigate today's shifting landscape, the most useful stance is a layered one, attending to historical legacies, recognizing geopolitical incentives, and keeping faith with the human capacity to cooperate. A fully unified humanity may remain aspirational, yet the world is unmistakably tilting toward a system of regions. North America, the Caribbean, South America, an Islamic arc from North Africa to Southeast Asia, and a more coordinated Africa are all asserting distinct interests and identities. Africa, in particular, is poised for greater prominence, with a young population, strategic resources for the energy transition, and a widening set of partnerships, from China and the Gulf to Europe and the United States, amplifying its leverage. Russia and China's connective push into Europe via rail links, ports, and industrial corridors associated with the Belt and Road signals a new phase of continental integration. Freight trains now routinely run from Chinese hubs into Western Europe, symbolically binding the Eurasian landmass more tightly. This has real consequences, though. Supply chains adjust, standards compete, and political influence follows infrastructure. It is less a civilizational merger than a geopolitical and geoeconomic project, with cultural spillovers. All of this unfolds in a media environment that can inflame division as easily as inform. Modern outlets, driven by attention economics, often spotlight extremes, and states, as well as private actors, try to shape narratives to their advantage. Historical examples of influence operations remind us that media has long been a field of contestation. The practical response is not cynicism, but literacy. Diverse sources, check facts, understand incentives, and resist reflective partisanship. moving beyond rigid left-right frames can help audiences evaluate information on its quality and integrity rather than its ideological theme. In polarized times, seeking common ground and practicing constructive debate is not just civic virtue, it is strategic. In short, Huntington's lens highlights identity's power, but today's world is better explained by a braid of forces. Culture and belief, yes, but also geography, economics, technology, and institutions. Whether regions collide or cooperate depends on the choices leaders and societies make, how they build connectivity, share prosperity, and manage differences. That is the work ahead, and it's where the story of our evolving global order will actually be written. Thank you for joining this two-part exploration. If this sparked new ways of seeing the world, please like, subscribe, and share. Send your thoughts to diplomacyandiscourse@gmail.com. This is AR, and you've been listening to Diplomacy and Discourse. Until next time.